saw all 14 teams in the Big Ten play this weekend. A lot to digest from the last couple days.
But you can't ignore the fact that Northwestern Wildcats second in the Big Ten.
You just went straight to it.
Straight to it. We should just stop the season now. And I think that we should just put our brackets together right after the Super Bowl and just have Northwestern in the tournament.
Your true colors are showing. They're flowing out all over the place, but certainly is a huge story, no doubt. We'll get to Northwestern in a bit. But the big story is the one team that they are looking up at in the Big Ten standings, the biggest man on the number one team in the country. What a performance yesterday by Zach Edey. The Purdue center and National Player of the Year frontrunner had a career-high 38 points as the Boilers extended the best start in school history, topping Michigan State for the second time in less than 2 weeks, 77-61. Purdue is now 21-1. I have to start with Edey. Michigan State just has no answer for him. They're not alone in that. There are a lot of teams that have no answer for Edey. Just thoroughly dominant performance, Trey.
Yeah, I mean, he's the best player in the country, the most dominant player in the country. And I think what's so impressive about Zach Edey is his ability now to make jump hooks, one, off of both shoulders, right? He could finish with the left and the right. And even when you push him off the block a little bit, where he's kind of in that 8-foot to 10-foot range, he's still able to knock down those jump hooks as well. Just an overall dominant performance. Understanding that he has the mismatch against Michigan State, but I ultimately blame Michigan State's guards for this performance from Zach Edey. Now I'll explain why. A lot of times you can disrupt the flow of a post-entry feed by denying the pass that's going to go in there, because you know that Purdue wants the ball at the top of the key, and they're going to throw the ball to Zach Edey in the middle of the floor where you can't double team. I thought Michigan State's guards were extremely lazy in denying that pass. Purdue to the key pass into Zach pressure on big man if you're mistake, because you're not really in position to deny and push him out. And then there was about 7 or 8 of Zach Edey's post-ups where there was kind of that similar action, and Michigan State's guards did not deny him, and he was able to kind of get those easy looks down low.
Interesting. So putting some of the blame there on the guard play, what did you think about when Edey did get the ball? I mean, the first time they played, it felt like their philosophy was just let him get his points, and we'll worry about everyone else. And it nearly worked, as we know. It was that incredible game on Martin Luther King Day. This time it seemed like it was a little bit different. They threw a few different strategies at Zach Edey. None of them were particularly successful. What stood out aside from the guard play in terms of the way that Michigan State attempted to defend him?
Well, yeah, I think you have to be consistent with your approach, because if you don't have like a baseline strategy in terms of how you want to defend Zach Edey, I don't think there's a rhythm to how you want to like aggressively pursue what you're trying to do on the defensive end. So if you double one possession and then you play one-on-one on the other possession, everybody kind of on the weak side is going to be confused on what the strategy is. And so even if that ball does get into the post and one person is thinking double, one person is thinking playing man-to-man, now Zach Edey can read the situation, and that rotation is not in place to guard the shooter. So I just thought Purdue kind of just had their way offensively for the entire
and Edey has been, I mean, now 70 points in 68 minutes against Michigan State in 2 games this year. They obviously will be delighted never to see him again. And their strategy was really clear-cut, Purdue's. I mean, 54 of their 77 points either in the paint or at the free throw line. Michigan State really powerless to stop it. Again, join the club. A lot of teams are going to have problems with Zach Edey. Right. Bigger picture here, what does this tell you about Michigan State?
Well, I think it's been tough for them because obviously without Malik Hall, for a stretch, I think it messes up their rhythm a little bit. I think the biggest thing for Michigan State is trying to get back to being who they've been for the entirety of the Tom Izzo era, and that's, as you mentioned, controlling the paint. I mean, yesterday they had 2 offensive rebounds and 3 second chance points. I mean, that's unheard of.
Crazy.
When you're talking about a Michigan State team. You think about all the great players that they've had in the paint. I mean, Xavier Tillman, Payne, all these guys that have been able to kind of dominate the paint. Now, all of a sudden, this is kind of more of a perimeter-oriented team, and this is a team that plays a little bit better within the half court. And I think they need to continue to do that, play in the half court. I think that fits A.J. Hogarth, Tyson Walker a little bit better than playing too fast and too up-tempo. But they got to find some sort of identity in the paint, establish their will, be physical down there. Because right now, I think Sissoko, Kohler, those guys right now are just, I think they feel like they're on an island. I think some of it has to come from the guards as well. They got to be able to pitch in and rebound, be able to do some of the dirty work down there in the paint.
And if there are some positives to come out of the game for Michigan State, A.J. Hogarth had a nice bounce-back game, at least on the offensive end.
Right.
Jaden Akins starting to play more consistently. But kind of to your point, I mean, some of those numbers are really staggering. And Joey Hauser's been a huge part of what they do and ends up with 3 points. So you need to get a lot more out of him. They play again on Saturday against Rutgers at MSG. So it'll be interesting to see kind of if Tom Izzo can get this team back focused. We've seen some flashes from them here in the last few weeks. We felt like maybe they were starting to round into shape, but obviously not one of their better days yesterday. I was in Iowa City yesterday. Iowa scored 93 points against a Rutgers team. They came in allowing 57 per game. It's the second time that Iowa's played really well offensively against the Scarlet Knights this year. They also got Patrick McCaffrey back, and he didn't just come back. He hit 3 of 3 from three-point land, kind of effortlessly seemed to fit into the flow of Iowa's offense. It didn't seem like there was any adjustment period at all. And part of that is he's been practicing for a while here. And so in terms of getting him back on the court, they had already practiced quite a bit with him. But what stood out to you about a really impressive performance against a very good Rutgers team?
Well, I think first and foremost, I mean, the story of Patrick McCaffrey, taking 6 games off to take care of himself. I mean, he looked comfortable out there. And I think that was just the most exciting thing to see, just his ability to kind of let the game come to him. When he got in there, he wasn't necessarily looking to score. I think he had 2 assists in that first half where he kind of was playing within the flow. Some shooters, and then some opportunities presented themselves for him to knock down those 3 threes. But I think what really stood out in this game is just that this is just a bad matchup for Rutgers, right? I mean, you talk about Rutgers, what they hang their hat on is the defensive end and getting their defense set. And Iowa makes it so tough because they're able to push the pace with multiple guys. I mean, Brian Butch, I thought, made a great point. You have 4 guys that can get the rebound and go and play in transition. And I thought Rutgers on the defensive end didn't do a good job of getting back in transition. They gave up 23 points in transition. On the year, they were only giving up 7 points per game in transition. So it was a little bit uncharacteristic. And I think for Rutgers, too, I mean, turnovers. I mean, you can't turn the ball over on the road. 16 turnovers in the first 26 minutes of the game.
Crazy, yeah.
I mean, and a lot of those turnovers were unforced. I mean, just being careless with the basketball, throwing the ball out of bounds. What the big man? Amori, excuse me. Yeah, Amori had a few where he had the ball in the post and he kind of just threw the ball away, just kind of a little careless with the basketball. And so at the top of the Big Ten when it comes, they got to be sharp on the offensive end, get good possessions each and every time because they go through shooting slumps. And that's kind of the case with every team, some of the teams that we have in the league. But you got to get good possessions, good shots, get Cam Spencer going. So it's a little bit disappointing from Rutgers.
We said this at one point in the game. I mean, at halftime, 33% of their possessions had ended in turnovers. They had 13 turnovers in the first half. They had tied their season high in Big Ten play for turnovers by halftime. So to your point, really uncharacteristic, but they are not a great shooting team.
Right.
They are a really good offensive rebounding team.
Yeah.
And so if you can get a shot up on the rim and let Big Cliff go after it or some of these other guys who are really good offensive rebounders, that's part of the way that they generate their offense. Weren't able to do it in this game. And then on the defensive end, it's weird because we were talking to Steve Peichel the night before and he said, in that game in Piscataway, we just didn't come out with our typical intensity. There was just something that seemed to be missing.
Right.
And it felt the same way. Again, I mean, part of it might just be the matchup, but I mean, Iowa hits 12 of 24 from three-point land, again, against a really good team. They're allowing nearly 85 points per game in 2 games against Iowa, 56 against everyone else. It is just crazy. I guess the way I look at it, it's just 1 game from Rutgers' point of view, or 2 games. This is still a really, really good team. But does it call into question a little bit just how good this defense is? Or is it, to your point, just this team being Iowa, is kind of uniquely put together to cause them problems?
I think it's that. I think it's just this team is uniquely put together to cause a Rutgers team's problems. I mean, you talk about Chris Murray as well. Rutgers didn't really have a good matchup for Chris Murray. Caleb McConnell picked up 4 fouls. Dean Reber was switched onto him sometimes, and Chris Murray had his way in that matchup. I just think overall the way that Iowa plays with that constant movement, motion, Rutgers likes to gamble a little bit on the defensive end, run and jump a little bit, take some risks. And I think Iowa, with their movement, kind of picks them apart in that. So I wouldn't be overly concerned if I'm a Rutgers fan. I think it's just one of those matchups for them that's just not the best. They've been great on the defensive end throughout the course of league play just outside of Iowa.
93 points, tied for the most they've allowed in regulation in a Big Ten game under Steve Peichel. They will head home to take on Minnesota coming up on Wednesday, a game you can see on the Big Ten Network. Quick turnaround for Iowa. They've got Northwestern tomorrow night. We'll talk about that game a little bit later. Other action from the weekend. How about Penn State pounding Michigan by 22 yesterday? Largest margin of victory ever against the Wolverines, 54 all-time meetings. Wisconsin faltering. They've lost 6 of 7 after Illinois beat them at home Saturday. Indiana, meanwhile, 5 straight wins after pounding Ohio State. Remember, they lost 3 in a row prior to that. And Northwestern, as Trey mentioned, alone in second place in the Big Ten, pounded Minnesota Saturday. Second straight Big Ten win by 15 or more points. Had not done that in more than a decade. Let's start with Indiana. And amazingly, Trace Jackson-Davis had a double-double, and you could still say it was not one of his better games, but they had so many other players pick it up. Jalen Hood-Schifino was absolutely fabulous, and it feels like Indiana has figured out whatever it was that ailed them.
Yeah, they're getting back to their identity on the defensive end. But coming into this game, Trace Jackson-Davis obviously playing at an all-time high level, averaging 30 and 15 over the last 3. So understandably so, Ohio State sells out on Trace Jackson-Davis. And so that left Jalen Hood-Schifino, and it was so encouraging to see him knock down three-point shots, because coming into that game, he was 1 of 12 in the previous 5 games. So you know that he was in the gym. He knew that he was going to get those opportunities, that so much attention was going to be put on Trace Jackson-Davis. And now all of a sudden, if you're Ohio State, now we can't leave Jalen Hood-Schifino. And then you got Miller Kopp on the floor, so you can't leave him open. And so now Rihanna and TJD are able to play one-on-one in the post. And so Ohio State just didn't quite have an answer for their offense. But I think when I look big picture for Ohio State, I mean, I just see too much stagnant offense, too much standing around, 4 guys watching one guy play one-on-one basketball. Obviously, Sensabaugh is an unbelievable talent, but I would like to see them get more movement. We'll talk a little bit more about Sewing in the next segment. Obviously, a guy that needs to play a little bit better. But I just see too much standing around. They only had 9 assists in the game. I think it becomes really easy to guard. I know Holtman wants them to play a little bit faster. So I just want to see them get some easy opportunities in the offensive end. But overall, it was a great performance by Indiana, really starting to get back to their identity on the defensive end.
It is weird to see this with Ohio State, but I mean, they have very limited ability to get easy baskets. Yeah. They are last in the Big Ten in conference play in 2-point field goal percentage. I think part of that is Zed Key's injury.
Sure.
He obviously has been limited, but it is weird to see. I mean, they've now lost 7 of their last 8. It feels like nothing comes easy for this team, and most of the prognosticators right now have them on the outside looking in of the NCAA tournament. But it is weird because the offense was so good early on in the year, and now they're 9th in the nation in offensive efficiency, but they are 7th in conference play in the Big Ten. Yeah. So we have really seen it drop off for them. Penn State, Micah Shrewsbury really took them to task after the Rutgers game. I think it's fair to say they so gentle prodding. Yep. This was a really good performance.
Yeah, and I think when I watched this game, one of the things that Juwan Howard has done when they played against Penn State in both of the matchups, they're going to let Jalen Pickett play one-on-one basketball. They're not going to send help on his post-ups or his isolations. And then they also switched a lot. So Jalen Pickett was really able to get a good offensive rhythm going early, scored 14 of their first 19 points. But I think what was disappointing watching Michigan play defense is the fact that if you're playing one-on-one against Jalen Pickett, there's no excuse for guys like Seth Lundy, Andrew Funk to come off of stuff and get open looks on the perimeter. If you're double teaming and that's what you're going to give up, okay, you could live with that. But if you're going to play one-on-one defense, you can't let those guys get loose and break free and get open opportunities on the offensive end. But I think the player of the game, though, was Michael Henn. I mean, his performance against Hunter Dickinson, to hold him to 3 of 9, he's a little bit undersized, hasn't got a ton of minutes, and then also to be a pick and pop threat. I think Penn State might have found an answer at that 5 position.
That was really interesting because they are such an undersized team. But he really, as you say, the offense is a nice bonus. They have a ton of guys who can score on this team, but you're never going to turn down a guy contributing points. But what he gave them defensively, because this is the one thing that you do worry about with them, is they're so undersized in the post. To have someone who is a veteran player, I mean, this is his 5th different school, to come in and give you significant minutes. But again, this team is going to flourish thanks to the threes. They hit 13 of them. It is the 12th time this year they've hit 10 or more. It's the most of any power conference team. I mean, when they get it going, Trey, they are really hard to defend. What about the flip side with Michigan here? They still don't have a quad 1 win, but they have a ton of opportunities. I still look at this team and I say, you've got an All-American center. You've got Jet Howard back. I was afraid he'd be out for a while. He came back and had a great first half. They shut him down, obviously, in the second. It still feels like there's a roster there that can make a run, but for whatever reason, they just haven't done it.
They just haven't been consistent on the defensive end. I think that's the biggest thing. I mean, you go back a few weeks ago, they played Maryland at home. I mean, they looked like the best defensive team, in the Big Ten. They're flying around, they're talking, they're communicating. Terrence Williams was, kind of the catalyst and the head of the snake on that defensive end. But then there's games where it just looks like it's a pickup basketball game where teams are able to kind of run their stuff. There's no resistance. There's no pressure on the basketball. Now, I look at Kobe Buffkin as a guy that I think that can also be kind of a catalyst in trying to build some sort of consistency on that end of the floor, because they're going to be able to get what they want on the offensive end. When you have a guy like Hunter Dickinson that you can throw the ball to, you have a guy like Jet Howard, then you have shooters around them, they're going to be okay on the offensive end. But you got to be able to win some games with your defense. You got to be able to stop some people there, because if you don't, then now you can't get out in transition and get easy baskets.
Gave up 49 points in the first half. That was the most that Penn State had in a conference game in 13 years. They do get Northwestern on Thursday, and we talk about quad. In Ann Arbor, maybe you can start to build some confidence, particularly because Northwestern will be on 1 day of rest in that game. Michigan's got until Thursday to get ready. Northwestern has to go to Iowa City tomorrow night and play that makeup game with the Hawkeyes. Let's talk about the Wildcats. We made it 21 minutes and 20 seconds without you being able to really break down Northwestern. We talked about Nebraska and Minnesota last week being games that they really couldn't afford to lose. You kind of look at their resume and you say, hey, they've got some really good wins. Like they've gone into Michigan State and Indiana and won. They beat Illinois by double digits at home. So they've got the good wins part reasonably covered. They're going to need some more. But the one thing that really works in their favor is no bad losses. And frankly, with all due respect to Nebraska on the road isn't a loss that's going to kill you. But Minnesota at home would have. I mean, that was a quad 4 game. So they figure out a way to get it done. Big picture here, what are you seeing from the Wildcats?
Well, they got a tough road ahead. I mean, you got 6 road games and 5 home games. And I'll read those 6 road games. You got at Iowa, at Wisconsin, at Ohio State, at Illinois, at Maryland, at Rutgers. And I think if you can find a way to get 2 of those wins, and then also outside of Purdue, obviously, which is a tough up with Zach Edey against Matt Nicholson, I think they're going to be right there in position to easily not just be a bubble team, but to get a comfortable NCAA tournament bid. But I think the biggest thing, besides is getting those home wins against the middle of the pack teams, right? Getting the home wins against a team like Michigan that's, struggling. I think even going back to like when I played there, the thing that I felt like was the difference was we could never quite get those home wins against the teams that were not at the top 3 of the league. I think the teams that ultimately make the tournament win games at home against those kind of mid-level teams. I think that's going to be the key.
And they were done 0 favors schedule-wise with only playing Minnesota and Nebraska once. Last year was the season where it really felt like the schedule actually kind of fell in their favor for once. And unfortunately, from their point of view, they were not able to take advantage of it. But you say 8 of their last 11 games are quad 1s. Now, well, that's great. That's what they need. Is quad 1 wins. Northwestern just needs wins. They just need to figure out a way to win, probably 4 more, maybe 5 more to really feel comfortable. But it is crazy to see them alone in second place in a year where I don't think anyone anticipated that happening. 6 Big Ten wins through 9 games. This is just the 5th time in the last 90 years that Northwestern has won 6 or more of its first 9 conference games. Again, a huge stretch, and I think you're right to point out, like, that Michigan game on Thursday is a huge game. Even going on the road, win but you look at that and say, well, won the game in Evanston, and maybe you can figure out a way to steal that one, because that's what it's going to be. They just need to figure out a way to accumulate a few more W's.
Yeah, I mean, we just saw Illinois kind of take care of business at Wisconsin as well. So I think it's definitely, a winnable game for the Wildcats. And I think big picture, I think the transfer portal era has really helped the Wildcats, because they've been able to keep their core guys. Obviously, you lose Pete Nance and Ryan Young. That's huge, right? But they've been able to keep a core piece of their backcourt. And ultimately, what wins games in conference play is experience at that position. You talk about some of the other teams that have struggled. They've had to bring in new guys in the backcourt. I mean, you talk about Michigan. I mean, Doug McDaniel, all of a sudden, all the pressure is on him to kind of run the show as a young player in the Big Ten. And so when I look at Boo Boo and Chase Audige, they've had growing pains. Obviously, they've had their share amount of bad games and then obviously a disappointing season last year. And they've gone through it. They've seen everything, and they're experienced, and they're poised, and they're ready for this moment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess I'd push back a little bit just in that those guys weren't very good guards for their first few years.
Sure. Yeah,
They've been far better this year, no question about it. But I don't know that anyone would have anticipated you lose two players to blue bloods like they did. And then Casey Simmons decided not to come back, ended up ultimately transferring to Harvard. He was a nice piece for them. Right. So, it's fascinating to see. Been a really cool story to this point. And for our big stat, brought to you by Gatorade, mention how hot Illinois is, 6 wins in 7 games. It is hard to find a team that has utilized the transfer portal more effectively than the Illini have. All 3 of their top scorers transferred in this year. They joined LSU and West Virginia as the only power conference schools that can make that successful of those 3 programs this year at 15-6. Matthew Meyer is part of that group. He is today's big interview, fresh off a career-high 26 points in Madison in that win over the Badgers. Matthew, thanks a lot for joining us. Congrats on a great outing on Saturday. That's not that long ago, less than a month ago, that Coach Underwood was really searching for answers on the offensive end, made it pretty clear he was unhappy with how you guys had played in a couple of his post games. What has changed since then? Because it feels like the offense is flowing so much better than it was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, Coach Underwood just made a lot of changes. I've credited him in a lot of my past interviews because a lot of stuff wasn't working for us on the offensive end, and he just completely changed the offense to fit more of our guard style.
Right. So things he's talked a little bit about is that it was more perhaps X and O than it was personnel. It was kind of fitting what you're doing X and O wise to the personnel, maybe along the lines of what you're saying. For people who maybe don't study the X's and O's, give a simplistic explanation of maybe what they could look for in watching Illinois that you are doing differently X and O wise than you were, say, in late December or early January.
Well, before it was a lot of motion stuff. It was just kind of do whatever you want out of this little action stuff that we do. And now it's a little bit more, how do you say it? It's a little bit more structured, but we have really talented players that can just go do what they want to do out of it. It's just a little bit more play-based. Gives us a little more structure, and we have talented players, so helps us create a little bit easier.
I mentioned the transfer part of this off the top, and I think one thing that I found a little odd with this team was you started the year fabulously. I mean, you got 2 wins that stack up with just about anyone in the country in terms of beating UCLA and Texas, and the rough patch came after that, and yet you're doing it with all these new faces on the roster. What was the adjustment like for you in particular? I mean, other than Dane, who you were familiar with, of course, from your time at Baylor, but really didn't play much at all on the court together. These are all new guys that you're playing with, and it's not unique to you. There are so many transfers and then newcomers as far as freshmen on this roster. What was that adjustment period like?
Terrence was leading us from the jump. He did such a great job of just kind of putting the team on his back for a little bit there. In the UCLA game, I mean, he just completely took over. Yeah, there's some clips playing of him right there in the UCLA game. So I think we just had a lot of talented players. So like we were able to get some wins off just based off of that. But now I think we're clicking a little bit more. Coach Underwood has done such a great job of fitting our personnel, and yeah, I think it's just up from here.
You were a part of a national championship team at Baylor, and one of the things that's been interesting in talking to Coach Underwood through the years is he discusses philosophy, a lot of it based on recruiting, but I would think it lends itself to the transfer portal as well, is that he wants guys who have won, wants guys who have been part of winning programs in high school. You were part of the ultimate winning program, winning a national championship at Baylor. What do you think you've brought in terms of that culture, that winning culture, to a program that's already a winning program in Illinois?
Yeah, I think me, Dane, and Terrence have all come from extremely high-level programs. We just know what the competition looks like. We know that it's going to be really hard every night. And it just, I mean, everybody knows it takes a certain level of work ethic to be able to compete at the highest level, but I think we just know that you have to stay together in those toughest moments because, I mean, the crowd can get crazy. The other players are extremely talented. You just have to stay together through that. And but at the same time, it's just playing basketball, and we're talented players, and we all play for each other, so that's really all it takes.
Matthew, I have to say I was really excited when I saw that you had committed to Illinois. Part of it was a really good player coming into the Big Ten, but I have to say part of it was the mullet. I mean, I was a huge fan of the mullet, and so I'm not going to lie. I was disappointed when you came out in an Illinois uniform and you no longer had the mullet. It was a very controversial decision. Give us some insight into why you are no longer sporting that hairstyle.
I did it. I went to the draft combine, and I was like, all right, I'm going to be a little bit more professional for this. And that's what I did, and I was like, dang, I kind of look good like this, so I stuck with it. But if you can't tell, my hair is getting pretty long, so you know, I'm wearing the headband right now. You never know if it comes back around the corner. So, but yeah, I'm just sporting the headband right now and the mustache. I think that'll do for now.
Right, the facial hair with the mullet was a good combination. There was a great quote from Jackson Moffitt. He was the other guy who was really rocking the mullet there at Baylor. I want to quote him. I don't want to get this wrong. Dude, you have great ears. Bro, you've got to show those off. So, now, I got to say, I'm not one necessarily to notice the ears one way or the other. But what did he ever elaborate? Like, what did he believe was so special about your ears?
So I just had like the biggest bowl cut that like covered everything on my head except my eyes pretty much. And I was like, I don't know, bro. I don't think I can do it. Like you pull it off so well. I don't think I have the ears for it. And then he just made me feel so comforted, and I was just like, wow, okay, I think I can really do this. And then the mullet was born.
It was born and it thrived. That's what teammates are for. Mm-hmm. They're there to make you feel good. I was fascinated to read a little bit about your high school career when I was prepping for one of your games earlier this year. It was kind of up and down, right? I mean, you went to a camp at Dallas Baptist hoping to get a scholarship there. They did not offer you a scholarship. With all due respect to Dallas Baptist, I don't know a whole lot about their program, but it feels like a guy who ends up as a key contributor to a national championship program probably should have stuck out as being good enough for them. And then all of a sudden you blow up and you're the top-ranked player in the state of Texas. And then it didn't seem like you necessarily handled it great. You didn't have a great end to your high school career. You averaged less than 10 points a game. Take people through that roller coaster of what it's like to go from unrecruited to heavily recruited, to have that pressure on you. What was that like?
Yeah, it was actually really hard for me. So the reason Dallas Baptist didn't offer me is because they knew that I would never go to a school like that, and I didn't know that at the time because I never thought that like I was good enough to play college basketball. It wasn't even like a thought in my mind. I swear to God. But and then I just started playing better, and then like literally like maybe 3 weeks after the Dallas Baptist didn't offer me and I was pretty upset, I probably got 15 offers within that next week or like month, and it was just surreal. And then all of a sudden I just felt like all this pressure, and it wasn't just like fun playing basketball anymore, and I watching me, because it was just never even in the back of my mind to play college basketball. So it just felt like a lot of pressure that I didn't know how to handle. But having that feeling early, like in high school, it really helped me with college, because you actually have a little bit more pressure in college with so many people watching and people talking about you. But by the time I got to college, I felt like I understood how to handle that pretty well.
How did you learn how to handle it? Because it strikes me that that's something that for some people has to be really difficult. This notion of, as you said, all of a sudden everyone's watching me and you're expected to be the man, and you're just a guy who enjoyed playing basketball with your buddies and never really thought much of where it was taking you. How did you shift that mindset?
Yeah, it was not an easy shift. I really started to figure out my faith in that time, because that was like a really hard time for me, because I was just going out there and just dropping duds. I mean, I was literally the #1 ranked player in the state, and I averaged like 8.5 points that year. It was really hard, but like the main thing was just that like over time, like the worst scenario that I could envision happened, and then I realized it wasn't really that bad. Like you go have 2 points in front of a sold out crowd, everybody's expecting you to drop 30, and then you just feel so bad, and then you go home and you're with your family and you go to sleep and you wake up the next day and life goes on. So it's just like over time you start to realize there's really nothing to be scared of, and that's really how I felt since then. I mean, I played in some of the biggest games in college basketball, and I just know that at the end of the day, people can say what they want on Twitter, but I have my faith, and I just go home and play video games anyway. So it's like, what they say matter to me?
That is a great philosophy. You mentioned what people say on Twitter. We were thumbing through Instagram. A happy anniversary. Yesterday was the 9th anniversary of a special moment. Do you know what it was?
I don't.
Well, we're going to give you a look at it right here. It was the 9th anniversary of your first ever dunk.
That's big time.
Take us through this moment.
Okay, this was actually one of the best moments of my life. I kid you not, because I had never dunked, and I kept telling people at school like I could dunk, and they're like, no, you can't. I'm like, watch, and I would just go up and miss, and I'd be like, but I've made one before. I was kind of lying, and then finally I got one on video, and so it's crazy. I set up my iPad to record it, and literally as I set up my iPad, I'm about to go dunk it, my dad walks outside. And so he got to watch my first ever dunk, and you can hear him in the background of the video like laughing, because he was just like, wow, like, because I was only like 14 at that time, so it was awesome, and me and my dad were both like excited. It's like so excited after that.
Well, that is fabulous. I'm glad we gave you a chance to relive that moment. Before I let you go, as I said, I'm going to be down in Champaign tomorrow calling your game against Nebraska. Give me a quick scouting report on what we should expect.
Hold on, say that one more time.
Quick scouting report on tomorrow's game.
Tomorrow's game
against Nebraska.
Well, they have like completely changed what they do. They've had some starters that are out right now. They've really gone more to a style of like they have their really talented big, and then he sprays out to shooters. They're much more aggressive on the three-point line. I think they've actually been playing pretty well offensively recently, so it's going to be a lot different challenge from the first time. We won by a lot last time, but we're taking them very seriously, because they've got some players that are playing really well right now.
Matthew Meyer, basketball star, aspiring ear model. Really appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Again, you can see the Illini right here on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app coming up tomorrow as they host the Huskers. Then it is Northwestern and Iowa. Coverage starts with the tip-off show, 6:30 Eastern. A Big Ten basketball doubleheader presented by Jeep tomorrow right here. Taking a look at the Big Ten standings. Purdue is in front, up 2 games, as we mentioned, in the loss column over surprising Northwestern. Cats have played the fewest conference games due to their COVID pause. 3-way tie behind them between Rutgers, Indiana, and Illinois. 10 of the 14 teams are at 500 or better in conference play. Trey, wanted to check the temperature of a few guys. These are all players. Kind of the common thread here is that you think need to heat up a little bit as we head into February and we start in Columbus.
Yep, Justice Sueing. I think, over the last 5 games, only averaging 7.8 points per game. and shooting 1 of 13 from 3. And I think the most important stat, more than those two, are the fact that he's only averaging 3 rebounds per game over the last 5 games. I think that's an area where he can really start to pick it up and develop that offensive rhythm where he can get the ball off the glass, push it in transition, maybe get fouled, get some easy opportunities, and also hitting the offensive glass and getting some putbacks. So I think that's where I would start. Justice Sueing is so important to what Ohio State does. You know, Chris Holtmann likes to run a lot of different actions to post him and Sensabaugh up, and right now Sensabaugh needs his running mate to pick it up right now.
Had that 33-point outing in Maui against Texas Tech. It kind of felt like, here we go.
Yep.
Because he was hurt all last year, of course, and it just hasn't. There have been moments, certainly,
Moments for sure,
where he has played really well, but it has not been at the consistent level that you might want to see. And again, Ohio State desperately needs that. They took him out of the starting lineup for a while, now have reinserted him. So see whether he can pick it up. We talk a lot about Chris Murray in Iowa City. Philip Rebracha has had a really nice year as well. But I know you want to turn to the backcourt there.
Yeah, I think Tony Perkins is a guy that Iowa really needs to be consistent as well on the offensive end. 5 of the last 6 games has been in single-digit scoring. I think he does a good job of being aggressive, getting downhill, but I think sometimes it's just a matter of knowing time and score, when to pick his spots, when to be aggressive, when to get the ball to your guys and Chris Murray and Rebracha. And the other thing, too, is being confident with his jump shot. This year, he's only shot 28% from the 3. Teams a lot of times are sagging off or going underneath. If they go underneath, he has to be able to come off that thing and knock it down. Then defenses will respect him, and then he can be able to create off of pick-and-roll situations and be more confident on the offensive ends.
He had a great game a couple weeks ago when I was there against Maryland. Then Aaron Eulis played fabulously yesterday, and you start thinking about, man, if their backcourt gets hot on a consistent basis, on the offensive end, they're borderline unstoppable. And then you put Patrick McCaffrey back in the lineup as well. So there's a chance for them to really be good. Northwestern's success is based largely around its guards, but I know you're looking to the front court there.
Yeah, I think this one is a little bit different with Robbie Barron. Robbie Barron's played well, right? He hasn't been, maybe those 2 first guys, those guys have kind of hit the wall a little bit. Robbie Barron has played well, but I just look at their upcoming schedule and what they have. And if Northwestern wants to kind of comfortably get into the NCAA tournament, I think Robbie Barron is the X factor. And I think it's just more being a matter of aggressive, right? Only in this calendar year, he's only shot 9 times or more once. And I think that in order for them to take that next level, especially as teams are going to really start to load up on Boo Buie and Chase Audige and try to take those 2 guys out of the game, Robbie Barron has to be a guy that's aggressive and assertive on the offensive end and look for his own shot.
It is interesting. He only takes about 17% of their shots when he's on the court. He has the highest offensive rating of any player on the team. So it kind of speaks to what you're saying. And I will say this, if he gets hot, they'll find him. I mean, I think the big thing that's changed with Buie and Audige this year, and all you have to do is look at the Nebraska game when Ty Berry was absolutely on fire in the first half. The extra passes on the Northwestern team, the ball has stuck a lot less. It still sticks a little in the end of game situations, but it has not stuck during the game to nearly the degree that it did in previous years. So if you get hot, they will find you. Finally, as good as Indiana has been, it feels like they could be better if this guy gets going. And again, coming off an injury.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest. I mean, he's coming off an injury, so still trying to work himself back into the lineup. So, I mean, there's an excuse, or a valid excuse there. But Race Thompson is the glue that holds this team together. I mean, all the things that he does that doesn't show up on the stat sheet, setting good screens, knowing where to be on the defensive end, bringing that energy and that toughness and that physicality. And I think it's tough because right now, I mean, Coach Woodson kind of has a dilemma where he has, Geronimo, who's out right now, and then Rihanna, who's starting to kind of pick up his level of play. You got like 3 options at that 4 position, but I think it's a good problem to have because you can kind of mix and match how you want to play in the interior. But Race Thompson ultimately is the guy that's had the most experience, that understands what it takes to win at the highest level. I think he's going to be the key for this team going down the stretch if they want to make a run to being in the top of the Big Ten and also in the NCAA tournament.
Working him back into that lineup at just 9 points in 49 minutes in these 3 games. He's been back. First game he only played 4 minutes, but we'll see whether or not he can get back into a flow because that is a tough front court to deal with. To your point, some of these other players have stepped up in his absence.